I guess we'll have people coming in as we're here. So I will just begin with telling everybody that I guess I don't know if anyone on the screen was here when our speaker was came to address the American Club last fall. But Metin Hakverdi had just come back from the United States. He had just spent 6 weeks there, and he was telling me about his trip. He was following a lot of the several presidential candidates, attending the rallies. Back then, it was Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg. I think it was with Julian Castro and Beto O'Rourke. Yeah, and that was the hot story of the day. Was all of the Democratic presidential candidates, and while it was fresh on his mind, I asked him to come and address the American Club the following week, which he graciously did, and we were so happy to have you there at the America Centrum for that. It's amazing just what a little over half a year, or not exactly a half a year later, how the situation has changed, and exactly the presidential candidates, it seems like ancient history now. And here we are with facing a question of existence for the whole globe. So glad I asked Metin to join us here. He's for those of you who don't know, he's a minister of the Bundestag, representing the 23rd district down in Harburg, Wilhelmsburg, the sort of the southeastern portion of Hamburg. And he's also on the U.S. Ausschuss there, or you can correct me afterwards, Ausschuss, I think, for Angelegenheit für the Europäische Union, and Finanzausschuss, Haushaltsausschuss. So I just, we'll just start off with Metin welcoming you, and just you go ahead like a town hall and tell us what you're experiencing these days, and just share your thoughts here.
Well, thanks, David, for having me. A special occasion, unfortunately special occasion, because obviously it's a crisis, and we're not doing this for fun in the digital way. So I hope everybody is healthy at home, doing fine, and hopefully everybody stays that as long as possible. And I hope we get through this situation as well as possible. Thanks, Dave, for having me. I had 2 digital town halls so far, or three maybe, and it's a little difficult to get the crowd into this system, in this digital system, but we're getting used to it. So in the last 2 or 3 sessions, I tried to not only talk about myself and my work, but more to get people into talking about their situation. Because at this point, what is very difficult for us as politicians, lawmakers, decision makers, is to foresee what the situation of each individual is in this particular situation. Because it's obviously, we've never had this before. Olaf Scholz said it in our party group meeting last week in Berlin. It's not only a crisis for Germany or Europe, it's a crisis for mankind. So everybody's more or less hit, but the situation is very, very individual. So please take the opportunity, let me know how you are doing, what you are expecting, what works well, what doesn't work well. I get, and this is part of my town hall communication, I have to draw a strict line between the 2 parts. One, what is happening in my constituency and what people expect of me as being a member of parliament and with their individual problems. So I had to study flight plans from South Africa and New Zealand last week, because there were citizens, German citizens, got stranded all over the place, all over the planet. And obviously people from Hamburg like to travel. Obviously minors from Hamburg like to travel. That was actually the most difficult thing. I had German citizens in Algeria getting involved in car accidents on their way to the airport, and problems everywhere, but they're all back home now. But that was not the work of a lawmaker. That was just individual support for very tough situations at home. In my constituency, as you probably know, the south of Hamburg is I would say the economic powerhouse of Hamburg. So I have a lot of economic struggling with individuals running small businesses, bigger businesses, in all varieties. I have also some winners of that situation, but most of them are really struggling hard, not knowing what it's about in the future. And all those individual issues, you are probably struggling as well. As kids are at home, home office plus kids at home is not fun for everybody. Let's put it that way. I'd like to hear from you as well on that one. The other side of my job is what's happening in Berlin in session week. I'm in Hamburg now, so this is I'm in my home. I'm in my living room right now. This is not how my office looks in Berlin. I was in session week last week. Will be in session week next week. It's a little different than in Hamburg. Hamburg basically is running a very, very, very thin program on the members of the Hamburg Parliament. In Berlin, we are in presence, so everybody's there. The party group meeting last week, 150 members of the SPD party group, only 17 were dismissed. The others were all there. We didn't meet in one room. We had to meet in 2 rooms, which were digitally connected, so we can keep the spaces between the members as we are supposed to be. So it's difficult. Everything takes longer. I don't know who's experiencing video conferences and telephone conferences now of you guys, but it works. But to me, it's exhausting. Everything takes longer than it used to be. That's my experience, especially if you have more than 10 or 20 or 50 people in the line. It takes a lot of time because you have to individually call after those conferences people you have to talk with. In addition to that, so next week will be the Bundestag, and we are obviously trying to analyze the situation as it is today and what we expect it how to be in the future, in the near future, in the midterm, and on longer term. So at this point, we are probably talking less about the hospital situation, the healthcare system, less. That doesn't mean it's over, but we obviously have, at this point at least, capacities that is for this situation as we are here today are working. Just to give you an example, we have at this point, I don't have the exact numbers from today, but probably have around 60 or so intensive care beds in Hamburg that are open and vacant for everybody. So we are not in our limit supporting those. And the hospitals in Hamburg, like everywhere else in Germany, get 670 euros per bed from the federal government just to have it there. So what we did 5 weeks ago is we just poured out tons of money, billions of money, literally, trillion of money, and one of that aspect was to keep the capacities, increase the capacities in the health system. So that worked pretty well because we just spent a ton of money. So the hospitals in Hamburg are not suffering at this point. They're making good money just by keeping the capacities open, which we at this point are not using for 100%, which is fine, which is a super good situation compared to other parts of Europe, as you've seen in northern part of Italy, which was awful, and it's still a catastrophe. So, but we are more now talking about the economic factor, obviously, of opening up the society generally, and everything is connected to the economy. If you have a kindergarten, if you have kita places open or not, or do you have school opens or not, is of course something that has to do with education, like universities, but it's directly connected with the economy. You will see that in May next month. We will have Steuerschätzung. What is Steuerschätzung in English? I have no idea. So it's the expectancies of the 16 Bundesländer and the federal government, how much money we are taking in federal taxes, local taxes, and all taxes that are being paid in Germany. And the numbers will be a disaster for all budgets. It will be the toughest cut we've ever seen in the history of this country, which we expected, but we obviously have to talk about the situation as it is now, how it will develop in the next weeks and months, how we get out of this economic crisis as well. And as you all know, we are facing the same problem like everybody else. It's a conflict of objectives. To have get the economy running, and at the same time to prevent basically getting people infected and being killed or seriously harmed. That's what it's all about. And this conflict of objective will continue to be our problem, our main problem, not as lawmakers only, but for the whole country, for Europe, for the world, for the next weeks and months to come. That's what I expect. So that is difficult. It will change day by day, at least week by week. We have those 14 days, as you know, the infection rates, to see the numbers, how they develop after you've taken measures and you want to wait 14 days. And obviously that's very difficult in the political sphere to wait 14 days and just ask everybody else to wait to see what happens. So the federal government and the Bundesländer have worked together in a way that our constitution actually doesn't support. If you talk about for schools, David and I talked before this meeting about the school situation in Hamburg. Usually, you would argue in Germany, school issues are issues of the Bundesländer. So Hamburg decides for Hamburg itself what's happening in the schools, and Bavaria does it as well. But under these particular circumstances, the Bundesländer, the 16 Bundesländer, decided together with the federal government to at least try to get as many issues together on the road, because one thing is a constitutional rule, everybody can decide for themselves, but the other is the public communication. So it is very difficult what we are facing to communicate strategies to individuals on the street or at home. That is super difficult, and it really harms the conversation, the communication, especially if we're talking about changing habits like wearing masks or keeping the distance, the physical distance. It is very counterproductive if you don't communicate in a very homogeneous way, so everybody more or less talks in the same manner to reach the people. So I think that has worked pretty well to this point. Maybe we talk about this later, how it seems from the outside how it works in the United States between the governors and the federal government, which at this point I would say doesn't work as well as in Germany. But we will see in the length to come how this works in the next weeks, months, and maybe years, because I think I agree on the analysts describing the situation as once the crisis is over, the part that comes after it will be not the old normal. It will not be the same as it was before. It will be some sort of a new normal. And the new normal, just to give you an example, what I'm thinking about a new normal is that I think we will have to change some things in our social behavior connected to our economic behavior before we enter again, let's say, a soccer stadium with 50,000 people in it. I think we would have to change something in our visiting restaurants under particular circumstances, the closeness of people and how they interact. I'm not sure exactly how this works out. When I see those people, doctors and people that are knowing the science behind it, when I hear them talking about what people should do to get this pandemic some sort of being able to control it, it reminds me of my visits to big Asian countries. Sometimes visiting China or visiting Singapore before the crisis, thinking, okay, how do those people interact with each other? I traveled Africa 2 years ago, East Africa 2 years ago, during an infectious crisis on the west of the continent, and to me it looked like everybody is really used to this situation, that everybody has to watch themselves not to get infected from each other. And to me it seems like Middle Europe, Central Europe, Germany, this is a new ball game for us, and we have to get used to those new rules. And I think it's a big question of how long it takes to get used to those new rules to solve those conflicting objectives. running up, getting up the economy, and saving the individual health situation of all people. So there will be a new normal, but there will be a normal. There will be a normal, but it will be a new normal. And the technical stuff, I have no doubt Germany is, you might find it arrogant, but I think we are good in that stuff, to find technicians, to have engineers to get the machinery. But the social behavior issue, which is connected to that, I think it's new. If I remember, I went to a public rally, a political rally in Singapore, and there was no crisis whatsoever. This is normal life, and people were wearing their masks on the street, having distance. You really can't differentiate whether it's a cultural distance, a social distance, a medical distance whatsoever, but they don't get as close as people get in, I don't know, on the beach in Italy during August. That will change a little. That will change, and we will interact in a new way. So I feel a little sad about this, because it seems like something will get lost. Something will come back when we have all those testings, and if the immune system of an entire population will increase, we're getting back to something of the old stuff. But we are evolving into something new. That is always sad, to leave the past behind. But this is the first session I see with the American Club digitally. So that's new. Why not? So it has advantages as well. And I think we will come up well after this crisis, but it will have a long-lasting influence. It will have a long-lasting influence economically. We will have really bad numbers in the next months, not only in the Western world, but on the planet. And if you see what's happening in the health sector, in part, I don't even want to mention single countries, but it is not only a challenge for the individual health of the people, but it is a challenge to their political systems, to the stability of their societies, which at this point, I don't see a problem with that in Germany at this point, but I certainly see a problem, let's say, countries in Africa, Brazil. What I'm seeing and reading from Brazil seems to me super problematic. It was problematic before this crisis, but it seemed to have an even exponential impact on the structural crisis they had before. And the United States, I'm just an eyewitness. I'm just looking from outside. My plans were to be in the US right now. The plan was to be for 3.5 weeks during April at Harvard University. They canceled all their programs, so that is very sad. I gave some classes to video classes, digital classes to undergraduates in political science, just to make up for not being there last week. And some are just, they are really thinking about this influence of the crisis to the political system of the United States. They are not really, okay, this is East Coast, this is student life, I know, this is just one part of the bubble, I know that. But I see that maybe you guys have also some impressions of that. I'd be really interested to hear from you. I'm not too sure whether this crisis is one of the crises where everybody comes together for a common goal, or whether it is a crisis where everybody at the end leaves the ground of consensus and blowing up the system. Excuse me. So,
while you're taking a sip of water there, Metin,
sure.
You touched on so many interesting points there that we could go on for hours, especially what affects, once the smoke clears, what's going to happen in the various countries like Brazil or Hungary, or even countries that we don't hear so much about in the news, like the Philippines, or ones where we're concerned about human rights that are just not even on the radar. But before we get to those, I'm just curious about a couple of things that you mentioned early on. You said that you were involved with getting the Germans repatriated after at the early part of the crisis, getting them back home. I'm curious, was that bill picked up by the federal government and flying them home? And secondly, I know you're not in session this week, but I suppose last week, how are you on a practical level? How are you meeting with your colleagues? Are you all just staying far apart, standing around a room, wearing masks? What is it? Tell us a bit about what it's like.
Your first question was what about who was paying for the flights?
Yeah, who picked up the tab for getting Germans home after the beginning of the crisis?
It is actually, that was my, people asked me that. The moment they came into Hamburg, the first question was when they were home is, who's paying for this? I have no idea, because there were different types of airplanes actually flying. So you had those fancy, did you see that when the biggest crowd was flown back from Egypt, over 30,000 German citizens. So they were basically getting flown back with civil airlines. So that was on regular on regular routes. Yeah. So most of them were had their regular flyback tickets. Like Turkey, it's the same stuff, at least till the end of March. So New Zealand was totally different, because New Zealand was 100% shut down to a certain extent. So I had citizens from Harburg there. They were not close. They couldn't travel because there was no bus traveling, because public life was just shut down. So even if you had a hotel like those guys, very, very close to the airport, there was no way to get there, because it was really a shutdown. And to that point, there were particular special deals made between the U.S. government, the German government, and the New Zealand government, just to open up for those citizens. So those citizens were allowed to get to the airport. So very special, very different. I heard a story. I don't know whether it's right or not, but I just like it, so I tell it. That Heiko Maas, the foreign minister, had to phone each and individual state government and heads of government in South America, because at a certain point at the beginning of March, the airspace of most Southern American countries were locked down. So, and they had a sort of, there were no exceptions, let's put it that way. So he was individually calling up for individual planes flying through individual airspace. And we had over I saw the number, I think 235,000 German citizens, something around 230,000 German citizens within 5 weeks coming back. So, which is not, under usual circumstances, an easy thing to do, but if you have lockdown airports, it's very difficult. And they're still not everybody back. We've still people, they have decided voluntarily to stay in some countries because it's just too difficult to leave again. Yeah. So, and the second question is in Berlin, we are fighting as members of parliament to have as normal life as possible, and at the same time respecting the individual crisis between us as we have to keep the distance. So I give you an example of the finance committee. The finance committee went into session physically on a regular basis, but everybody did okay in Berlin. If you haven't, those guys of you who have visited Berlin know what I'm talking about. We have special rooms, halls for the committee sessions. They are round, circle round, and they are basically made for those sessions. So the numbers of people that are attending a session are fitting perfectly into that room, which means under these circumstances, it is too many people because you cannot keep up the distance. So what they did is between the party groups, an informal agreement that everybody would send in only a little more than 1/3 of their members. So we were a lot less people in the room proportionally between the parties. It was exactly the same as before, and all the other members were connected to the session by phone. So because everybody was super disciplined, it took just 4 hours a session. If we would have the same debates as we usually have, I think it would take 3 days or so. So we will have to find a way how to deal with that, so everybody can really do what we usually do. We are not at that point yet, but it worked pretty well. It worked pretty well. And we had in the financial committee and in the budget committee, we were the two, and the legal and the justice committee. Those were the three that really had to pass a lot of laws. If you look at the decision making on the federal level, our Tagesordnung was just not shorter than in usual times. So it worked. It worked. But we had a fight. The government. I don't know whether you heard Wolfgang Schäuble's interview 4 weeks ago. He said something like, well, we should talk about a Notparlament in case everybody's getting sick. I've never seen such a shitstorm within, and it doesn't matter what party group, whether conservatives, Die Linke, FDP, AfD, the SPD, everybody said, no way, no way. So we will not take, we can compromise on a lot of things on this one, but we will not get into the structure of our institutional setup. No way, especially not now. There was 100%, this debate lasted, I felt it lasted for around 2.5 minutes, then it was over. And he's not somebody, he's not anybody, he's the president of the Bundestag. So, so we are taking this stuff really seriously. The result is, and then I'm finished with my answer on that one, is we are just constantly on the phone. And I have this park outside in Wilhelmsburg. I live in Wilhelmsburg, right next to the Inselpark. So what I'm doing is I'm on the phone, and because the weather was so good the last days and last weeks, I'm taking a walk for 4 hours, 5 hours, being on the phone, coming back home, just reloading it and charging it up. I feel you cannot substitute everything digitally. It's impossible. So at a certain degree, you need somebody to be faithful. You can, if you have structures that are really that have been established a long time ago, and everybody knows how to do it, then then for me it's easier to switch that into the digital world. But especially if you meet somebody new, somebody you've never talked before. Imagine somebody hiring somebody at these times. On an interview, you do digitally. You can do that once in a while, but not on a daily basis. So something is getting lost, unfortunately, but we're trying to, as well as everybody else.
Yes, very good. I'd like to also now, this is a town hall virtually. I'd like to open up the floor, but first I would like to also say hi to Darian, especially. So if you have any comments, Darian.
No, it's just Metin, it's very good to see you again. The last time we got an opportunity to meet each other in Washington, and then another opportunity here at the America Centrum. So it's always good to hear from you. You always have wonderful, insightful comments to make and to share. So I really appreciate that and the opportunity.
Thank you.
I mean, I suppose I would have one question, which is what we're all struggling with is how we more or less foresee this unfolding for the rest of the year, because there seems to be two camps developing, and one is like, well, this is the new normal and the new normal will be that way moving forward into the future, which means more of this digital meeting, a lot less of interactions in person, and that just simply will be the new normal. There's another camp that says, no, eventually we'll get back to the way we used to do things, but that may take some time, maybe the summer of 2021. So I was just wondering, what's your view on that? Which way do you think that this will go?
How should I know? How should I know? No, see, think of in theory. Think of it if you've known before. Think of it. We are in, let's say, September last year, and we knew back then what will happen. How what would we've done? So think of it. What will you do? You still you don't have the medicine, as still not. Probably you would have gotten the engine on building manufacturing masks in Germany pretty fast. But what we have done back then is what we can do now as well. Obviously, more time pressure is there. Okay, this is my personal view on this. This is not political at all. In my spare time, in my free time, I'm at the THW, the Technische Hilfswerk. I don't know whether you're familiar with that. The Technische Hilfswerk is actually, how should I say this? This is something that's a survivor of the Cold War. It is a super big institution with over 70,000 volunteers, and we are doing catastrophe work, making several things. What we're doing. What I'm doing is I'm working in logistics. So we are actually, if water supply is not working anymore in Germany, if more than 1,000 people are in action of the Feuerwehr and the police, and you have to just basically feed them. How do you feed 1,000 people on the field if you have no infrastructure? That's what I'm doing in my spare time. I just like this, okay? But one of those issues in such organizations is if you practice for cases of catastrophe, of really bad things happening, when civil order is basically not there, if you don't have the infrastructure, the strongest weapon you have is the people. So what they do and what they don't do. And people are always, individuals are always also the biggest problem. So they are the biggest problem solver and the biggest problem maker in the same crowd. And this is where communication is so super important. So I expect if we get those medical masks to a degree of more than 2/3 of the population, there will be a lot of life coming back. But look on the streets, come on. You see people wearing masks, highly super technical FFP3 masks for surgery, and they are wearing them someplace where they don't make sense. So it has to work that they know how to do that. So the communication is key. It does make a difference that if everybody plays by the rules, everybody, with no exceptions, you can kill a virus within a society within 24 hours, in theory. Practically, the question is how you can isolate it on several cases. So if we all practice, if we are all more experienced, and not just you and me, but most people, almost everybody, is more experienced on how to behave in a public place, like, let's say, a restaurant, we will get faster back to normal than before. Remember, I don't know, have you ever traveled China? So when you land in Beijing, you think of, guys, everybody's sick here. No, this is their standard. If you have an airport where so many people get in from so many places in the world, you are probably that's smart to do that, to get everybody on this issues of health and testing everybody. So
although there in Beijing, I wore the mask more for the pollution than anything else.
But I remember the times being in Beijing, and basically as a European saying, "Oh, the air is so bad here, I cannot breathe." And then the Chinese colleagues would say, "Well, guys, we watch the health system here. We watch it better than you guys in Europe." So I didn't take that serious. I admit it. I did not take that serious when those guys told me that 3 years ago. We are not very experienced with that in Europe. I don't know about the United States.
We are not either.
No.
But in Europe, we are beginners. We are newbies on this issue. So, but we are catching up. We will be catching up. I'm convinced of that. What I'm just a little scared. I tell you straight away is. Economy is a tough issue. It is a tough issue. So we are Democrats. We believe in our institutions and our way of living. But come on, it is connected to a high living standard. Come on, you have to be realistic about this, and we have to get back on track on this one. And we need the economy actually to build up with all the issues we need in the health system, and it's connected. It's not always two issues, it's connected. If you want to have a good health system, you need a good economy as well.
I just want to also say hi to Thomas Kraupe. Thomas Kraupe is the director of the Hamburg Planetarium. Maybe you can say a word as well. We just had 30 years of the celebration of the Hubble that he just had with the planetarium, and also it's 90-year anniversary of the planetarium this week. And coming up in a couple of weeks is going to be 90 years of the Adler Planetarium in Chicago, which is, of course, Hamburg's sister city. And we're going to have a special event with both planetariums, with our Consul General and the Consul General of Germany in Chicago for that day, May 12th. Mark your calendars. Thomas, you want to say hi?
It's a great pleasure to be here and to listen. This is a very interesting discussion. And and certainly sometimes I feel like in ET, or is it the global perspective from above, from watching from space this planet, and it's amazing. And I wonder how things will end when I look to Sweden, when I look to the US, when I look at our own country. Well, we have to see, but I really look forward to working with the American Club, with you, Consul, and with the Consul General. Pleasure seeing you again, Dario, and all the others, and listening to this very, very interesting what you said. And I hope really the best that the friendship between United States and Germany will not be affected by all this kind of competition that kind of is connected with fighting the virus, and that's one of the concern I have simply. But we are we are together in this. And hopefully the friendship with the United States has been strong and should continue to be very strong. It's very important for us, and we owe so much to the United States after World War II. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you. So I'd like to open up the floor to any other here to ask a question to Metin Hakverdi. If you can just unmute yourself, you can go ahead and pose a question. And while you're thinking about it, let me just ask you, Metin, can you tell me I'm curious about how how much of a game changer this has been, just at this, or even at this early stage in decision making on the floor of the Bundestag between the parties. Has partisanship changed during this process?
Yeah, sure. Well, as you know, there is a tradition in Germany that during times of crisis, usually the parties stick together and not be divided, usually. If you look at the financial crisis 10, 12 years ago, I remember, I wasn't a member of parliament then, so this is just storytelling, but people told me to get those budget rules passed for Greece back then. Basically, Die Partei Die Linke were against all this stuff, and also the FDP back then. But I think they weren't in there. They all agreed that they can be voted on the bill within a few days. So even when they disagreed on the issue, they agreed on a procedure to get the majority vote through. I'm a lawyer, so I have no idea how to write that in the constitution that would work. You would just have to have a greater agreement. So there is a tradition in Germany to this one. And this case was also happening right now. So, but we have a 7-party system, as you know, now in the German Bundestag. If you count the CDU and CSU as 2 parties, it's 7 parties. And obviously there's one party that is basically I would say a saboteur at this point. It will not stay that way. It's obvious that it won't stay that way. It will stay for this. It was the case for the first stage. As you know, we overdraw our budget by over 150 billion euros. You need a big majority for that in Germany. So that worked. But the longer this crisis is proceeding, and the more differentiated the issues come as economically, socially, culturally, the whole thing, internationally, there will be more opinions between the parties. But when you follow, okay, I'm a social democrat, so I'm not objective on this one, but my personal observation is, usually in times of crisis, this is a golden rule, and there are only a few exceptions. It's a time of the executive. So in Germany does that mean with the executive is the chancellery, but also all the secretaries, but also the party members of the ruling party. So I'm in government because I'm SPD and the CDU as well. So the problem is for the parties that are not in the government. And you can see that, for example, with the FDP at this point, because there are some sort in the government, because as you know, in North Rhine-Westphalia, they are part of the coalition. So to a certain extent, they go with the mainstream, but then in Berlin, on the federal stage, that if you don't want to be just, if you want to be recognized or seen with 4 opposition parties, it is super difficult. And if you look at the numbers, the polling numbers, which most Germans would say, please, politicians, don't care about those numbers now in times of crisis, but I can tell you, we are watching those numbers nevertheless. The opposition parties have a super big problem, and this will continue to being a problem, and that will narrow down the potential for consensus in fundamental questions, I would say. I hope the basic stuff is still working, but I'm not 100% sure how long this will last.
So you're back in session next week?
Yeah.
And what are the big topics that are coming up? What are you grappling with regarding the crisis?
There's a lot of, it sounds like technical stuff, but it affects a lot of people. So if you have Kurzarbeitergeld, what is Kurzarbeitergeld in English?
Part-time employment? Or part-time? I don't know.
I was like part-time worker. Yeah.
Something that we don't have in the U.S.
Yeah, sometimes exactly. So because we poured out a lot of money, but we could not cover all cases, and sometimes it's legally difficult to spend this money because you have to describe the several cases. So there's a lot of technical stuff to do, especially in those committees for work and social affairs, the BMIS and Hubertus Heil department. That's a lot of stuff. We have to at least talk about what's happening if all those taxes are not coming in. That will happen not sometimes in the future. It is happening right now. That has a budget effect that has an immediate impact. And then we will have a debate on the further structuring of the European Union and their financial institutions. I assume there will be no solution to that next week, but we will be definitely having, there will be most of the part actually, because the crisis is obviously happening in entire Europe. And we have a common currency in the Eurozone, and it has a super strong impact on that one. We are still at the beginning of this debate, but this will, that doesn't mean we will take breaks on this debate. This will be constant. This will be a constant debate for the next months.
And I have one more question, David, if I can. Do you feel that the current situation, I know that Germany has been working on digitalization in general for quite some time, and we're now talking about in the US how this current situation is going to force us to work on our remote platforms, our ability to communicate remotely, and we're making those investments. Do you feel like that this is going to be a positive push to help Germany in the digitalization realm, in terms of the schools, in terms of meeting and just digitalization in general?
Of course. I mean, it's obvious that this will happen. Does it change the strategy of the government? Will there be a debate about it, how to do it, or will it just happen because super big markets obviously develop? If you've known this before, is anybody on the share market with Zoom, with the Zoom company? I don't know. Probably it has developed pretty well, right? So you don't need any government for that one. The market will do that. Yeah, but think of it. Okay, this is just to be super smart on this one issue. Imagine this situation and a digital blackout. So okay, this is in crises, you need to have backup systems. So our backup system now today is the digital room, as we are doing it right now. This is our backup system, right? But what if that system doesn't work? So just to keep that in mind, if big structural debates start now about the digitalization of Europe and Germany, I'd be just glad if we had optical fiber rolled out in entire Germany. Okay, so, and you know what we have to do for that, right? We have to find 18-year-olds that are willing to make money on physical work in the ground. That is our biggest problem at this point. So we will not solve this just because of such a crisis. But it will, for practical reasons, it will make it. But I feel it is not only a question whether the digital room gets more important. I think the personal aspect of it will get more valued as well. So it doesn't necessarily mean that this whole thing will, it's like books, okay? I believe books have a super big future. I don't believe in the extinction of books, but I think they will be more important, and maybe they will cost more than in the past, and people are willing to spend more on fewer books. So things are changing a little more complex, but definitely. This is Zoom now. We're on Zoom now, right? So yes. I've tried. I have for the Bundestag. We have for our system. We used to have two systems on communicating on video conferences, and they were established in the Bundestag. Okay, nobody is willing to accept this, but I tell you the truth. The only way we used it was to communicate with committees in Brussels, because I'm a member of the European Committee. So there wasn't, some smart guy said, okay, should we always fly back and forth from Berlin to Brussels, like a few times? So let's put up a video system that really works. But only the guys in the European Committee used it. Nobody else used it, never ever. It was an empty room, always. And you have to go into a room. You couldn't do it from home. Come on, it's like, that's not digitalization, that's whatever. So I was used to two systems using that. And now in the last, I don't know about you, in the last 5 weeks, we tried out at least a dozen systems, even more than that. And we still haven't found out which is the perfect one. I follow a big debate within the Green Party. The Green Party has how they communicate within the party group. And they obviously have a super big issue on private rights, where the servers basically save the information. And it's difficult. It is difficult. So they will be developing on this one as well. There's a lot of business to make on this issue, also in Germany now, I hope.
You talk about emergency situations and backup plans. How far do these backup plans go? Like what if the supply lines or supply chain is completely cut in getting food to the stores, or if if power goes out and we don't have internet at all, we don't have electricity? How far do these scenarios how far are they discussed in the Bundestag?
But we haven't discussed them. We have a setup. We have a setup for that one. So, but we haven't thought about this in this crisis because we are thinking of this economic crisis and the health issue of it. but for any reasons. Do you remember a year or 2 years ago? I don't even remember who it was. It was a secretary of this government. He gave he gave the advice, the public advice, that any person in Germany should have 1.5 liters per day for 4 or 5 days at home, and some sort of food, last resort of food, so to speak, to get like for 4 or 5 days. Do you remember that? Who was that? And it was basically, I'm from the I'm working for the TRV, so for me that was normal stuff. Yeah? Don't have an empty refrigerator, basically, okay? But the public response was mostly, how crazy is he not? Doesn't he have trust in our system, in our economic power and all that? And it's, come on, guys, it could take some time. Nobody will starve to death in this country. Nobody, ever. But it could take some time to get it to your home, okay? If really bad things happen, it could take some time. But I'm 100% convinced in this country it will get a lot faster to you than in some other countries, let's put it that way. So we have a system of our federal system, I think, is really actually a lot more reliable than a central system. A lot of people don't believe that now anymore, because the communication between the states in Germany now and the federal government are sometimes awkward. If you look to Bavaria and compare Bavaria with North Rhine-Westphalia, and people ask, they do it different way, opening schools, opening supermarkets or something. But it is a strong, it is the community, the commune, the theoretical setup of our society in the federal government, the countries, and the commune at the bottom is a pretty good. They're pretty resistant to crisis, I would say.
Yeah. Anyone else have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I have a question. Hi.
Go ahead, Emily.
All right. So I was reading the news today and read something, or read that Angela Merkel supports the EU climate goals of reducing CO2 emissions to 50 to 55% by, or compared to 1990, of course, by 2030. So this is a little bit more ambitious than what Germany was trying to do before they wanted to reach 40% of the level of 1990. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on this and how it can be implemented, especially in times of this pandemic.
Thank you very much for the question. Finally, somebody asked a climate question.
I actually work in climate, so I actually spend pretty much all day doing this sort of thing.
I just want to take the opportunity to thank you for that one, and to point out a problem. Obviously, there's no way. Well, there is a way, but it's exhausting. Everybody's talking about the coronavirus, and it seems to be the only problem we have, which is obviously not the case. And it's absurd. It takes so much of the potential. I believe in a democracy, you have only a certain amount of space for public debate and decision making. Mm-hmm. You have to choose how much of it you use for foreign policy, for education. It is a choice made collectively. And right now, it's almost 100% occupied with this one subject. But here is the truth. The truth is we have some problems on our list where the coronavirus is just an addition to that, which we will not be able to solve on our own. And we is the Federal Republic of Germany for itself, the European Union for itself, not even the West, but a global issue. So it is obviously the health issue of viruses. It is the issue of at least the climate. I think it's also an economic issue, because I believe that, I'm a social democrat, sorry for being a lefty, but on this one, I believe competition for itself only is not a sustainable system for the planet economy. If competition on individual persons, as you have to compete on a lower price for your work with 8 billion people on the planet is not sustainable, I would say. But there are a lot of economists that would say I'm just a communist on this one. But but the virus is just one more or less. So back to your question, super important. We will spend a lot of money. We will spend a lot of money, public money, in the next months and years to come. Why? Because the economic situation is really difficult, and everybody, even fiscal conservators, accept that now the public sphere has to put in money to get the private engine going again. Mm-hmm. And here comes up a very simple question, which is a super important question. What are we doing with this money? Are we, Abwrackprämie, do you know that word? The Abwrackprämie was basically a decision during the financial crisis to say, okay, we will have to save the car industry in Germany, because so many jobs are connected to that industry, that we are basically subsidizing with a lot of money people buying new cars. So make it really simple. I think the long-term effects of this one, except that also, of course, those were not really climate-wise. I don't know whether cars are the right decision to first, but
probably not so great.
But probably not so great. But you can see especially in the German car industry, I would say that this decision postponed decisions in the car industry until today. So it wasn't really a long-term success for them. If you see that they are not really competitive in international markets right now. So the question is, what are we spending this money? And this question comes up on two levels. One is the national level, Germany, how we spend our money, and one is the European level. If we agreed on a 500 billion program last week, more or less, in the European Union. It is being debated whether there is a second 500 billion or even bigger program coming up in the next weeks or months to get the economy going again. So if there are billions and billions spent in Germany, in the Eurozone, in the European Union, and in North America, in the United States, and other places as well, there should be a super intensive debate on this. What are we spending it on? And I tell you what my fear is. I believe that Europe will do better than other places in the world. And I think Germany will do particularly well. And the reason is not because we are better people. That's not the case. It is because we can afford to do better. If you are in a really poor country, which is economically doing a lot less good than Germany, it is very tempting to go the other, more conservative way and not spending it on climate change as investments in reduction emissions and investing in the coal industry or in the steel industry to get it emission free in the future. So there will be a problem of the competition between different areas on the planet. So there is a call for international cooperation deciding about those investments. Because short-term it might be, long-term it might be the right decision for Germany to invest in green economy and green industry, but it could be short-term a real disadvantage for because our competitors do it on a much shorter scale. So here is a big call for international cooperation, and we do it as we always do it. We start out in Europe, and you will see that Spain and Italy will not be as green and lefty as we are in Germany because they cannot afford it. So we would have to help them to make an economic case for that change as well. And once we have, this is a perfect world, in a perfect world, once we have this consensus in the European Union, we can go out. So if we had I have no idea how to do this with the US president at this point, but obviously within the Western camp, I'm sorry, my wife is having at the same time a video conference as well. So we are really testing this for the first time parallel. So I hope everything is doing well. So usually I would say, if this was not a crisis for a virus and for economy, but for international security, let's put it that way, the United States would have to be the leading global power to do so, to call out foreign to have an idea, a vision of the future, and then to find on a global scale people that are joining this idea. Like in the good old Woodrow Wilson case for a better, not only a better United States, but a better world. At this point, I doubt it that, at least until November, I don't see how this will happen in the United States, at least not in the White House. So, so everybody has to chip in his share to it, and that will be Germany will be super important for the European Union, and the European Union will be a little important on the global stage, but we should use this situation. It is a very, very important situation in terms of climate change, because if once you take the wrong decision now to get the economy doing, you spend so much money on the old path for economic reasons, for good economic reasons, but you will have even bigger problems in the future. So that will be our decision. I hope we will have the spirit to take this as a ground for a new approach for problem solving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think long-term thinking is really, really crucial in this aspect, because like you said, it would be really easy to maybe take a path that's not quite as carbon neutral and not quite as green as we like it, just to try to get the economy going again. But if we do that, then we end up cleaning up those mistakes 10 years later when we realize that we're running out of our carbon dioxide budget and getting even closer to 2050, and the Paris goals are nowhere near in sight.
Okay, but I 100% agree with you. Nevertheless, see countries like Bangladesh today. So they are, because our economy is crashing, they cannot sell anything on our market. And, obviously the US dollar market and the euro market is for them super important markets. So there obviously will not be, there will not be a winning case for a political party, for a political leader in those countries for a long-term solution on climate change.
No, of course. I was specifically referring to Europe and to stronger economies with that comment right now. Yeah,
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Sure.
And there's something that we need to do something about the industries in those countries as well, and the fact that we still really strongly support the fast fashion textile industry and all of these climate centers, so to say, that come from these areas, and I think there's a huge structural change that we need to make, and that's not something that we can answer in just one short session or one short sentence. I
heard a number of how much money it would take to make the German steel industry emission free, because the technology is there. It's just very expensive to make. You can imagine that making steel takes a lot of energy. So to make it emission free is it's not too easy. I'm not an expert on the technical side. But those numbers, how much it costs, I can't remember how much it costs, whether it was 20, 30, 40, or 60 billion euros. It seems small compared to a trillion billion program everybody's throwing on the market at this point. So there should be some smart decision making on whether to buy old cars with old technology versus new future related technologies. I think everybody's agreeing on that one. The question is how to get the money fast into those markets to have an economic growth that is also benefiting the people right now that don't have jobs at this point or losing their jobs at this point. But I see the economic side, the climate part, and the virus problem. They're directly connected with each other, and I think that's the point you were making. And I agree.
Exactly. Yeah. I hope that that companies especially will kind of use this as a motivator to maybe start looking or to start their changes toward carbon neutral things or toward climate change measures maybe a little bit sooner than they had planned to, because I think that this is also showing us how much is possible if, as you said also earlier with stopping the virus, if we all work together. So like if you look at China's emissions for the last quarter from coal, for example, I think they're down by like 25 or 30% against last year, which I think is really, of course it's, connected with a very large economic downturn. So it's not all good, obviously. But I think it's really interesting to look at these numbers and to see how much we can actually make happen if we all work together to do something like this. So I hope, being someone who works in the field of climate change, that this will, help show companies that we can actually do something about this if we take the right steps and are motivated to get it done.
Just one last advice on this one. Next week, the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, is supposed to present a plan, not only how much money the European Union will spend to fight the economic crisis in Europe, but also on what parts of the economy, what it should be spent for, how much, and in what branches it should be spent for. And maybe hopefully we find a little answer to your question within that, and what she's bringing up there next week.
Yeah, thanks for that.
So thank you so much for joining us here and sharing your insights. I hope you don't mind if we call you back a few weeks down the line to give us an update of the situation.
Sure, anytime.
Okay, so yes, that's great. Thank you so much. You're our connector there into the Bundestag, so we love to hear what's happening. So we look forward to hearing from you in a couple of weeks. I just want to remind everybody, next week we will be back on for our event. Next week will be the former German Consul General in Chicago for the Midwestern states, who just came back last year. And he's going to give us something non-COVID topic on talking about an interesting instrument that has been produced in huge numbers in Germany over the years, the harmonica. 200 million have been produced in Germany and exported to the US over the years, and made a huge impact to the whole music scene in the United States, something that probably most people are not even aware of here or in the US. And we're calling that a German-American love story. So Consul General Herbert Quelle will do us the honors of presenting this interesting instrument and also giving us a demonstration. He's an enthusiast himself. That's on Thursday, May 7th. And then, as I started at the beginning of the event, the following week on Tuesday, May 12th, we will have a celebration of the Adler Planetarium in Chicago, together with the Hamburg Planetarium, both celebrating their 90th anniversaries, two of the world's leading planetaria. And Thomas Kropp, who is on this call, the director of the Hamburg Planetarium, will also have an interesting in-flight experience for us on the call. Consul General Darian Akins, U.S. Consul General here in Hamburg for the 5 northern German states, will be also on the call, and the counterpart in Chicago, the German Consul General for the Midwestern states, the current one, will also be on. So we look forward to that. We'll also have a message from our Mayor Tschentscher. So Tuesday, May 12th, mark your calendars. So look forward to seeing everybody again sometime soon. We're doing basically a once a week event here with the American Club online. So thanks for tuning in, and we will have this also in video form available. The link will be posted, so you could all use it for your social medias and for people who didn't get a chance to get on at this time. So thanks, everyone. Great to see you all, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Stay safe, stay healthy, and wish you all the best.